Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this big guy right here. This is the Spyderco Knives Yojumbo. Oh boy, is this thing big. But anyways, first off though, in the name of full disclosure, I want to thank Spyderco for sending this guy along. I reached out to him, I said, hey, I'd love to check out Yojumbo. They said, sure, no problem, and sent it along. Nonetheless, they've seen my disclaimer. I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, the ugly. Might be a gem, might be junk. They still sent it along, but nonetheless, we have to assume this is the very best quality controlled one of these guys ever, although I don't know that it is. And that I've doing my best not to let that affect the nature of my review. So there you go. There's that. Next thing, let's do some size comparison because the size is rather big. Unfortunately, I don't have the Yojumbo 2, which would have been a very nice size comparison, but I can compare it to a couple of other pieces. Here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2. Here it is against the Spyderco Delica. And what we see here is that here's big. Here it is against the Spyderco PM2 or Paramilitary 2. Yeah, is big, especially in terms of cutting length. Yeah, it's a big one. And then, oh, no, keep the on the table, right? And then finally, actually, I want to compare it to another recent Spyderco release that is in the same sort of idea, but in a very different size range, and that is the Spyderco Canis. Canis, I don't know which one it is. And what we see here is that actually the Canis is only about like a half an inch, quarter inch. What are we looking at here? About half an inch shorter than the Yo2, or the Yojumbo, that is, but, carries in a much smaller piece. So, there's that. And then finally, actually not quite finally, two things. First off, this is the Yojumbo. This is a scaled-up version of the Yojimbo 2, which is a very popular knife by Spyderco, both of which were designed by Michael Janich, who is a martial arts instructor type, as well, he teaches edged combat, right? That's kind of his thing, right? And that's what this is designed for, but this is a 20% size increase. It's nice to not say price increase. Size increase over the Yo2 with some ergonomic tweaks as well. Then finally, speaking of that whole self-defense angle, here is the point. Here is me. I am going right around it. I'm going to miss the point aggressively because, like I said, Michael Janich is a martial arts instructor. That is his thing, and this is a self-defense focused knife. Of course, it's vital for you to remember that the thing that makes a knife capable of defending you is not its design, but your training. And that for most of us, without that kind of serious, intensive training, de-escalation and a pair of running shoes are your very best self-defense tool. But given all that, I'm going to go ahead and take Michael Janich's word on the self-protection view. I'm assuming that, a person who is well-respected in the community for designing knives for that market has done a good job here, and I'm not really capable of evaluating exactly how well this will work in that domain. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on this knife as an everyday carry piece. Is this going to be a great knife to have in your pocket every other moment of your life when you're not engaged in that kind of thing? So to me, at least, that's how I'm going to be treating this guy. Is this a great EDC choice? And take it from that perspective. So yes, I'm missing the point, but hopefully you'll see that I'm making a different point entirely. So let's go on ahead and talk about the good, the great, the bad, the ugly of this very interesting knife. So on the good side, start with G10 is super grippy. This is a knife that is not going to be slipping out of your hand, not only because there is a very strong blade guard here, but you've got good contouring here, you got good finger grooves, and this G10 on this is grippy. Absolutely grippy. As much as like the Spyderco Siren, which is another recent release, and way more than, like, for instance, the PM2 here. This is a very grippy G10 sort of knife, and so I appreciate that very much. Next thing, that leads to, well, that doesn't lead to, but that enhances the fact that the ergonomics of the knife are generally pretty good, too. I have smaller hands than most, and so the Yojumbo is about, well, it's pretty out of place, but you can see here, there's been a lot of thought about how this should sit in the hand. With this little hump here, then this little area here for your thumb. This just locks into the hand in a very, very good way in multiple grips. If you want to use a reverse grip, although I don't really have the round-the-back grip on this guy because of the hand size, it works fine in reverse grip here too. It is, and hammer grip works fine too. This is a good knife in the hand. Ergonomics are very, very solid, and I can definitely see that they spent some time there. Next thing, this is a knife that actually pockets surprisingly well. What I mean by that is that, even though it's a very large knife, in practice, it's about the same thickness as the Spyderco PM2. And it's really, so as a result, it is a very tall knife. It's a very long knife, but it's not all that thick. And that's something I appreciate very much. And it makes it pocket especially well, given the way that the knife is designed. Because the clip is over here, and then the bulk of the blade, especially for tip-up carry, The bulk of the blade is hanging up against the side of your pocket here. The rest of it is just a smooth surface that your hand can go along. So that's very nice. Next thing, this is an ambidextrous friendly knife because you have 4 hole positions for clips, that is. You can move the clip to left side or right side tip up or tip down carry, which is nice. The spider hole is fully accessible from both sides, and the compression lock is a reasonably accessible knife for lefties as well. I would show you that better, except my left hand is clearly deficient in being lefty. But so ambidextrously, this is good. The blade on this guy is nice. It is CPM S30V, and that's a beautiful thing. And by the way, one little detail, this is now curved to match the handle there. That was, I think, not something I loved in the original Yojimbo. So anyways, that's nice to see. But but the hollow grind is good on this guy. There. So, yeah, and you've got yourself a very nice thin edge. There we go. Nice thin edge there. And just generally, nice blade. Even though the grind is very short, it ends up cutting well. So that's good. The lockup on this guy is a Spyderco compression lock, which is a great choice, giving you some very good strength, as well as a very satisfying kind of drop shot action when you want to do it that way. And the action was very good once I cleaned it up a little bit. Out of the box, I'll say the action wasn't super impressive, but after a cleanup, yeah, it's good to go. Then finally, it is a reasonably compact knife for the size of it. What I mean by that is that this has a lot of blade. I mean, if we compare this here to the Spyderco PM2, there is there is a bunch more blade here. And although, but there's only a little bit more in the way of back end to it, so to speak. It's big, but it doesn't end up feeling as big in the pocket as it is when it's deployed, so to speak. And so I appreciate that. And actually, speaking of the size, although certainly it's something you want to keep in mind, the scaled up size actually kind of fits with me. In some ways, I can see this as being sort of a more reasonable version of the Yo2. And I don't mean reasonable in the size sense. What I mean is, like, this feels more natural. It's kind of on brand, I guess, is a way to go. This is a big, mean-looking shard of metal. It's not pretending to be a polite little everyday carry option. There is no part of this knife that is saying, hey, look at me, I'm a gentleman's folder. No, I mean, you can be a gentleman and carry one of these guys, but it's a thing, right? So I feel like there is something to be said for this being a gigantic freaking knife. I mean, we're coming in here in terms of blade length, just a hair under 4 inches. And so, yeah, this is going to be a big, intimidating piece, and there's that. And then finally, on the good side, the name of it is a pun. And not just like a pun, but a bad pun. A pun that I would make. And so, absolutely, Yojimbo to Yojumbo. Oh, yeah. So anyways, to me at least, all that is the good is that the name is a pun of exceedingly low quality, which I appreciate. The scaled up size is, I think it really fits. It's reasonably compact for being that size. Has a nice lockup, a nice blade. It's ambidextrous. It pockets relatively well. The ergos are solid and the G10 is grippy. On the great side to me is actually not necessarily this knife itself. You could probably make an argument that the ergonomics or just the overall approach is the great thing. But for me, I'm going to go with the fact that it is purpose-built. This is not a knife that I particularly need. That's an understatement. Luckily, I live in a very peaceful world, and I'm a generally pretty peaceful guy. So this is not I don't need to carry a knife like this for my life. But the thing is, it is nice to see companies making no-compromise pieces with very special applications in mind. There are so many companies out there right now who are creating more and more and more vanilla, right? They're creating a bunch of knives that are 3 to 3.5 inch flipper frame locks, liner locks, on bearings with G10. It's just like, okay, yeah, we've seen this before. This we haven't seen before. Well, actually, we've seen it before, but smaller. Right? This is something that is a very, very specialized knife for a very, very specialized use case. And even if it is not my use case, I respect very much that Spyderco is going out of their way to make it. And Spyderco is a company that does this a lot, right? With like the Tusk, which is a mariner's knife, with the Siren, which is waterproof and meant for, gutting fish and whatnot. There are so many damn knives out there. That the whale rescue blade, I mean, come on. I appreciate very much that we've got these specialized tools here. Actually wrote an article about this for Knife News at one point. I just love seeing specialists, and I'd rather see 5 of these kinds of things than, one boring D2 flipper. I'd rather see 1 of these than 5 boring D2 flipper frame locks designed for everybody that appeals to nobody in the end. So to me, what's great is that this is purpose-built, even if that purpose isn't necessarily the one I need. On the bad side, first I'm going to drive everybody crazy by having something in both the good and the bad. So ready? Lean into it. Here it comes. This is a big knife. That is its design. The name of it is Yojumbo. So at some level, shut the heck up, Nick. But it is a big, beefy knife. It's starting to reach the level at which it becomes impractical for some daily tasks. You know, what I mean by that is, and that one's on me, I just couldn't, being on camera makes this more difficult, but, it is a reasonably heavy knife coming in here at 5.26 ounces, but imagine you're sitting in a coffee shop and you find yourself with an errant thread on your sweater, busting this guy out. Yeah, that's going to be a thing, because that brings us to our next point, which again is an inherent part of the design, but it's something you want to consider. This is a scary knife. If you take this guy out in the coffee shop and cut off a piece of thread with it, people will dive under the table. This is just, that's the way that it's meant to be. And in many ways, that's probably the point, right? If somebody sees you take this out, at some level, if you are in that self-defense mindset, that it's probably a good idea that they want to run, right? But for your everyday life, that may actually present some kind of an impediment there. So it is big and scary, although I acknowledge that is 100% the point. So, consider that for what it's worth. The price on this guy is okay, $165, and it is made in the States. It's made in the Golden, Colorado, USA Earth Factory there in Spyderco. But S30V is getting less impressive at the higher end of the hundreds these days. More and more people are pushing, nicer steels down there. But you know what? It's fine. There's more value to be had elsewhere, but it's okay. It works. I'm not going to bend it. I'm not going to get too crazy about that. Next thing, this is definitely, if you take a look at this little area right here, so if we zoom in a little bit, what we see is there is this little area, and then there is this chunk right here, which is unsharpened. My very first instinct was like, hey, sharpeners, you forgot a part, you stopped. But then I actually realized why. If we take a look at this knife, when it's closed, what we see here is that there is this little area right here. The heel of the blade, along with a little tiny bit of that blade, is almost, it is exposed. I mean, certainly the heel of the blade is exposed, but these areas enter the compression lock. And so it looks like this little bit here was done very strategically, such that there would not be a sharpened portion coming up against the finger here. And unfortunately, unless you wanted to go with a full-on sharpening choil, which I think that you could, actually, I see no reason why you couldn't, kind of remove this whole area. This is not going to be this little nubbin thing is going to be an issue. And I know there are a lot of people for whom that's bothersome, like with this Spyderco Shaman, which has the same issue, a little bump in that compression lock area, but this will definitely bump your finger out of the compression lock area unless you have very small fingers. So, do keep that in mind. If that little nubbin thing bothers you, it's going to bother you there too, and similarly, you don't want to sharpen that last little bit there because... yeah, that's problematic. So I'm not a big fan of that design choice, and I kind of wish that they'd brought this whole thing down a little bit into a sharpening choil of some variety and removed that issue altogether. Then finally, not quite finally, no, actually finally, sorry, I'm misreading. The clip is over a very grippy patch of G10 here. There is no smoothing of the G10 underneath the clip, and at some level that makes sense, right? It's a four-way clip, so you want to make sure that, but that's definitely going to eat on your pants a little bit, and so one thing you could always do is once you figure out which way you want to carry it, just get a bit of sandpaper and a respirator and sand down the G10 a little bit there to make that a little bit smoother so it doesn't eat your pants for lunch. So to me at least, that's what's bad here, is that the clip is over grippy G10. It's a little unsharpened at the back. The price is okay. It's a very scary knife and it's a very big knife, but that's kind of inherent to it, so take that for what it's worth. On the ugly front, there is one ugly issue here, and that is the centering. This is not a centered knife. It seems a lot worse than it is. I mean, if I just show you this part, yeah, it's off-center, but it's not so terrible. If I show you this part, where you see that there is there's a lack of distal taper in the blade up until about this point, right? Yeah, that doesn't look very good. And in fact, I had a number of reports of this on Instagram. Somebody said something along the lines of, was yours scented? And then suddenly a bunch of other people jumped in and said, yeah, mine wasn't either. A couple people said there was, but that's not great. Honestly, especially with a knife that's this wide, do it right. And I tried very hard during my disassembly to center this. I used every trick in my book, so to speak, but it just seems like this particular one isn't going to happen that way. Maybe there are ways to do it. Maybe there are ways to improve it. But at the same time, guys, at $165, I think that's something you can be doing better, and Spyderco generally does better. So that's not great. I'm hoping nothing's slipping at the factory there in Golden, because historically they've been very, very good at fit and finish. And so, yeah, there's that. That's the ugly, is that this guy came came unscented. Final conclusion, this is a very specialized knife. Like, it's got nice grippy ergonomics. It rides nicely in the pocket. It's good ambidextrousness. It has a very nice blade, a good lockup, a size that makes sense given the idea. The name sounds like a joke that I would make, which I'm going to consider good, but most people wouldn't. And then it is a very distinct sense of purpose, which is something that's missing in a lot of recent releases in the market. Thing is, you've got to want huge and scary, right? That's kind of the point. You have to want the compression lock with the nub and everything. The clip is going to be over rough G10, and this particular unit did come off center. But the thing is, a lot of those issues aren't going to matter quite as much in this context. And the biggest question regarding this knife is exactly the context. If you are looking for a big, mean knife for doing big, mean things, this is that, right? That is exactly what this is doing. And although I'm taking other people's words for this, not being, a trained martial artist and whatnot, it seems pretty reasonably well designed for the job. But the thing is, that, again, that's one perspective. But coming from the other perspective of somebody who carries a knife for boxes, for envelopes, other everyday tasks, and if you want something like that with a touch of self-defense capability, I'm not necessarily sure I would send you here. Partly because the size, like I said, is going to become impractical past the point. But the other thing is, frankly, just the design itself is going to be a little bit, weird. So you could consider, if you just want something sized down a little bit, there's always the Yojumbo 2, right? Which is a solid knife. But it is a little bit more of a reasonable size for most people's everyday carry. But there's also this guy. This is a recent release from Spyderco. This is the Canis. And it's, I think, around the same time released, maybe a couple of months apart. But this was also designed by a tactical operator, so to speak. It is also designed with that in mind, but it is a little bit more sort of, it's got lighter weight, it's got thinner stock, it's got very, very nice ergonomics, and doesn't have some of the other little issues with this. It's not going to be as, big and scary as this guy is, but I think this is going to be a more reasonable everyday carry option for a lot of folks. This is probably one of my favorite releases Spyderco's done this year, if not my favorite. And, so I think if you're just looking for something that is an everyday carry tool with some self-defense credentials, you might consider going this way, as opposed to if you just want a big, scary self-defense tool, maybe this is going to be more your approach. But anyways, I guess my final conclusion on this guy is that the Yojumbo is too. He's a highly, highly specialized tool. And although I very much hope that you never end up having to use it for its intended purpose, if that specific purpose is what you need, if that specific defense purpose is what you need, then honestly, the Yojumbo might end up being a big deal for you. Okay, anyways, there you go. Hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.